It's AEP's almost over. We're getting cranking on another episode. FYI, for all you people who are very loyal, faithful listeners to the podcast, we've been getting some pressure from people lately saying, where are your most recent podcasts? It's not for lack of effort. We've been consistently doing them. We have two things going on. 2 weeks ago, we had an episode that, our digital overlords decided to censor, and because of keywords that we used, and so they wouldn't allow them to run.
Even though the key event was already over,
yes,
we still are having it's basically suppressed.
Yes, so we have an episode we've been fighting, editing, trying to go through censorship, trying to get it approved and on platform. So once we kind of make it over those hurdles, we're going to try to pump that lost episode out.
As the Google censor, it's my job to protect you from reality.
And then we also had a special guest last week that we're hoping to be able to publish to, that's just clearing through legal and compliance. And so as soon as we get through that hurdle, we're going to pump that one out to the market too. So just don't fret. We are being consistent. We have been shooting episodes. So coming soon your way. So
yeah, what a world. How are we still dealing with this? But, oh, well, that's okay. It's hard to talk about, maybe what you wanted to start talking about with some of the new.
Well, and before that too, I think one other shout out to people too is we've also learned through this process this year with YouTube and having this be like a feature platform for things, that the lesson for us is that we are now going to start chopping up and putting more of our content too on X, just so that we don't have some of those same challenges, shorts in other places and locations with social media. So
LinkedIn.
Yeah. So YouTube's not just going to be the only platform where the content will be available. So,
yeah. Long form video content. Unfortunately, Google is the overlord, like Dan said, and they're extremely, extremely sensitive.
Yep.
But we are on Spotify. We are on anywhere that, I listen to all my podcasts on Spotify. All of our episodes are basically anywhere where you listen to podcasts, on Apple and everything like that. Sometimes they're just harder to find on the Google chassis.
Yep. So anyways, look for us in more locations as we're trying to find ways to get around that kind of stuff. And there's always a lot to talk about.
You would have thought that we're so naughty that we'd have to be steering around this just trying to talk about basic insurance information, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge of our industries. It's not like we're selling, refrigerators or something. It's we're talking about insurance products that receive some federal subsidies, and anyways, we won't go into all the details, but of course, because of that, there's a lot of nuance. You do have to talk about some things that are happening on Capitol Hill and how it affects, the industry. That's normal. And even when you're kind of being pretty neutral, regardless, those kind of conversations get flagged. So,
yeah, I mean, kind of, parlays into even with our last episode with one of our carrier partners, it's just everybody's so careful with L&C in this industry, and there's always the shadow games and the intrigue, which, we like to kind of bring all that stuff to light as much as possible, talk about as much of the behind the scenes stuff as it goes on. And we've been continually emboldened by people tell us every day that they listen to the podcast, that they appreciate it, that it's valuable for them. So we appreciate that. I wish we'd get more like comments and likes and shares and stuff like that, but we have a lot of shadow listeners.
The problem is if somebody likes it, then they're saying like, oh, I actually acknowledge that I listened to that, and I don't want you to know that I actually listen. I like to be in the shadows. Or if you're a competitor or somebody at the carrier, be like, but
yeah, like I've said before, we don't care. We're not going to try to recruit you. We just appreciate the listen. So
yeah, exactly. So I think we can segue into one of the things we wanted to talk about, today a little bit with that is, there's been a lot of announcements about appointments lately and appointees, and a big one broke just, 3 days ago. I can't remember if it was Monday or Tuesday. I was traveling, so I can't remember, but it was earlier this week. They announced that Dr. Oz is going to be, the new czar, we'll call it, the new head HHS, the head of Health and Human Services, which of course is CMS, it's CHIP, it's the ACA, it's Medicaid. So it's really, those are the four big
And who's his boss going to be?
So those are the big, components to Health and Human Services, right? So remember Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, and ACA. So again, that's now who's going to be running.
RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz, if those cabinet appointments get approved. So it's going to be quite the different tone, and it'll be interesting to see how the changes in regulation pan out. There's a lot of things that we could hypothesize on what we think are going to happen, but safe to say changes will be on the way.
I think we should hypothesize a little bit. I like to predict. I like to think about. I like to feel like that I'm right most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time I'm right. I would say I was pretty surprised, to be honest, about that pick. I've been following. If you do follow, I'm trying to use words that don't get me in trouble.
If you follow. Yeah, what is another word for that?
It's hard.
Current affairs related to...
If you're following current affairs, then I follow all those appointments and picks. And, essentially, this one did surprise me. Not saying good, bad, or otherwise, but I'm really surprised by that one. But I think going back to what's going to change a lot, I think he is very pro, from everything I've been really understanding about Dr. Oz, is that he seems to be a lot more pro Medicare Advantage and pro, privatized solutions instead of government solutions. So I think that if you're in the space and you're a fan of Medicare Advantage and you like that, then I think that that's a great pick for you. I would just say I think he's going to be a lot more less regulation, I'm guessing, from a philosophy perspective. I'm thinking he is going to be, I think the insurers who are having the Medicare Advantage space are going to be happy that he's the choice rather than some of the alternatives that were out there. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's right. I think that things are looking good for MA and the future there. I think things are looking great all across the board. I think those picks will be... There's some other high-level initiatives that are going to be taking place before they really get into the nuts and bolts of Medicare, and there's all sorts of things that are going to play into our industry. You've got Elon and Vivek that are going to be heading up that DOGE department, the Department of Government Efficiency.
You gotta slow down how much you're talking about all that stuff.
Well, I guess we can't. I don't know what we can talk about, but we can just talk hypotheticals. But I think there's going to be a lot of, if it happens the way that they're intending, there theoretically could be their goals to cut up to $2 trillion of, quote unquote fraud, waste, and abuse or over expenditures out of the federal budget. Right. And I think if they're, just as we've talked in the past before about where we're at with our debt, if you can start, trimming the fat, so to say, and reallocating and essentially being more efficient with those dollars, and you have a very pro, Medicare and Medicare Advantage and public-private partnership administration in place, then, I think that those dollars should theoretically trickle down to the carriers, and maybe that'll solve the MLR problem, the funding problem a little bit.
A lot of the squeeze right now.
Yeah. And maybe it'll be, some sort of easing of the finances that are in place there. I certainly think what's always good when we go through an evolution like this is the industry, everybody has to get better, right? Everybody has to get more efficient. Everybody has to be better with their dollars. They have to stretch them. They have to go further. And that goes down through the entire ecosystem. It goes from the government down to the insurance carriers, down to, even us as distribution and the carrier, the providers and everything. And so I think one of the side benefits of this year is having to be creative with, more with less as an industry and looking for opportunities to just be more efficient all the way across the board. So,
yeah. So when we break up like this, a new appointment, and like I said, I think that there's going to be not the ability to block many of these. I don't normally speak this way. I'm having to kind of
speak in code.
Yeah, a little bit. So, anyways, I think that most of these appointments are going to go through. I anticipate that that's going to be the case here with Dr. Oz. And like I said, I think he's going to be banging that drum, so to speak, and pro on the Medicare Advantage side. I also would just say that I think that one kind of on the sticking with Medicare, one thing that's been up in the air that carriers have been going to the NAIC, the HHS about has been the 1557 ruling on the discriminatory practices of underwriting for male versus female, and they really have not gotten clarification, even though they've been asking for almost a year. I think that goes out the window too. That's just me.
That's
guessing.
just going to be,
that's
tossed aside.
Yeah, that's going to get discarded. And I think that med sup carriers are going to continue to be able to underwrite based on male or female status. That's going to get another kind of prediction that I am anticipating for next year. And I think that funding environment gets a little bit better, to your point with the Medicare Advantage carriers. I also think that there will be some legislative work. The Inflation Reduction Act has been at the front of all discussions of our industry this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think that will be front and center next year to either be repealed, to be modified, to do something to change some of the ways that the Inflation Reduction Act works and how it's affected our industry. I absolutely think that will be the case. Like I said, there will be some policy work.
It'll be interesting to see how they navigate that, because it kind of was just kind of kicked down the road. The actual effects and the financial ramifications of that never really hit this year.
We did that demonstration period, which was kind of a Band-Aid, but they can't let it lie next year as was written, or else it will be really, really detrimental. And so I think that there will be legislative work and an effort to make something happen there. Again, these are all my predictions of what's going to happen or change. And then as far as Medicaid and CHIP and programs like that, I think they're just going to look at efficiency and waste. I don't think that the intention is going to be to make deep cuts and have the actual end user or that person below the federal poverty limit suffer more or get less support. But I think they're going to try to look at ways to your point, cut, bloat, and spending from those different initiatives and be more efficient. That's going to be my guess. And then I also am guessing, as far as on the ACA side, we already talked about it on this podcast, how like the I-9s or the I-10s, and people that don't have a Social Security number, we're already seeing in droves the carriers having to shed that business. And so I just don't think that that's going to be an avenue for, any of those brokers out in the space that are writing plans for people without a social. That's going away.
And carriers were already making those initiatives regardless,
right,
before this even happened.
Yeah,
They were already driving that way anyway.
But they'll kind of, stick a dagger in it and wrap that up. I think Q1 of this next year. So I think that goes away, and I think the ACA is going to. It's very stable. So again, I've always people are very polarized when every 4 years happens and there's new people around. Again, I'm talking in code, but again, I think there's bipartisan buy-in on the ACA. Everybody really likes it. I think it's going to continue to be stable. The funding environment's going to be good, but it's not going to be as aggressive with the growth as we've seen in the past. It's going to plateau a little bit. And again, going back to stabilization. So those are some of the things that I think I'm predicting that we're going to be starting to see next year.
Yeah, I to add on to a couple of those things prediction-wise, I think that, obviously aspects of the CMS call letter that were specifically, they didn't get a lot of attention this year, but were designed around social determinants of health and DEI type initiatives geared at STARS and HEDIS. I definitely think those things are just going to be not applied. I think the STARS and the HEDIS and the funding mechanisms are going to be overhauled too, to make more simplification and common business sense, especially considering, you have another lawsuit going on with UHC and Humana, and is it Cigna? Centene, suing the government about the unfair application of some of these STARS and HEDIS measures.
It was a customer service metric.
Yeah, and as we saw this year, basically all the carriers across the board took a major haircut in the funding because of these reimbursement rates due to STARS. pretty much unilaterally across the board. All the carriers did this year. And I personally think, if I had my tinfoil hat, I'd put it on. A little bit of that was a function of the funding environment of, hey, we need to really cut dollars out of the ecosystem, and here's a mechanism as to how we can do this.
We can interpret things this way with these cut points and adjust this and reduce those bonuses. Yes.
Correct. And so I think that there was a lot of gamesmanship there played that the carriers kind of had to put up with, that put a lot of downward pressure on these plans and the cuts and things like that. So I actually think that, the carriers are going to also rebound a little bit, and they're going to have some damage control from this year in terms of, maybe repairing and restoring some broker relationships, some lost faith and credibility, and some goodwill that they worked the prior 10 years to build up with these agents.
15 years.
15 years.
Yeah.
I think that if I'm looking in my crystal ball, I think the carriers look at next year and go, hey, funding is probably going to fix itself.
When we say next year, we're saying 2026.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And 2025 is probably going to be limited. It's baked. The results are going to be fairly baked. But I do think that there's, these carriers make decisions with, the horizon for the next year going in effect. So I think that we'll see some easing already for the filed 2026 plans. And I think the carriers are going to assume that there's going to be brighter days ahead, that they're not going to be quite the funding squeeze that they were in this year. And I think we're going to see some campaigns to smooth over and kind of like a dip a little bit of the MA this year that we saw, and maybe a retraction a little bit. And we're going to see, a move back towards pro-growth there.
It's going to be on like Donkey Kong again, as we would say, but right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, and I do think that there are going to be some carriers who have to live with some of the rash decisions, so to say, that they made this year, that will turn to be, very, very short-sighted. Now, of course, this is all, kind of a best case scenario. It may take a little bit longer for things to kind of course correct and shake out.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Here's what I will tell you. We always joke and make references, of like, hey, the North remembers, we keep receipts, X, Y, Z, like I do. But I've noticed in the broker community at large, again, going back to the third, you've got a third of the business written by legacy people being around for a long time. You've got a third of the business being written by people who have only been in it for, 3, 4, 5 years, and then you got the brand new people, right? And so it's kind of like the thirds, and they haven't lived through these cycles. And I would tell you, from my experience, look, I'm calling your bluff, a lot of you agents out there, meaning that you're all talking a big game about like that effing
swearing
carrier,
blood oaths.
Yeah, they screwed me, and I'm never going to write them again. But then guess what? I've seen it. They come back into a marketplace with really good products, or with a new broker manager, a change in scenery, and suddenly it's like, oh, okay. And guess what? You have a very short-term memory, and you end up selling their products again. So I'm throwing that out there. That is years and years of my experience in all these marketplaces across the country. I've seen what happens when you get a new RVP, a new director, a new broker manager, a fresh change in culture, a new spiff opportunity, better products, and it all goes away.
Well, what it reminds me of, you said, the North remembers. Shout out to Game of Thrones. The other HBO series that I love with the quote is, money wins.
You won.
Yeah. Money wins. Here's to us.
To us. Right? From Succession.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the truest quotes of all time is, after they go through these big political battles and all of this, back and forth, that's his simple solution at the end is money wins. And I think, where there's opportunity and where agents can make money and where the carriers can make money, that's where, that's what's gonna play out,
Yeah, like you can't tell me if you're a broker in a market that's like, screw that one particular carrier. And look, it could be Ohio, like, right? There was big headlines this week. Who was the smaller carrier, the local one in Ohio that stopped paying commissions?
I can't remember. We don't represent them. I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Too many of these carriers. Anyways, and some brokers in Ohio that we have are freaking out because now it's like, Anthem's not paying commissions, or Elevance, now they're not paying commission. Now other people are not paying commissions. And it's, look, you can tell me all day till you're blue in the face that I'm never going to sell them again. But again, if they come back around and it's a yo-yo, then, you're not going to tell me that I'm somehow going to go grow my business, not write that product ever, not going to lose business. It's just not going to happen.
Well, I think the CMS will get involved too on things like that too, because I'm now recalling what you're talking about, because Amanda Bruton, who's our friend of the agency, posted on her Facebook, and she was talking about that exact circumstance with that carrier going non-commissionable, and then Anthem as well. And she was talking about, there's like, I'm just quoting off the top of my head, like 2.5 million Medicare beneficiaries in Ohio that need help with plans.
Right.
And when you take out the funding mechanism for, the brokers to help support a lot of those seniors there, it actually cuts off access for them to get the help they need. And
but the ironic thing is, then you have people being like, see, you brokers are all money motivated because now, but it's like, no, you don't get it. They don't have a means or an avenue to go write the business. Even if they want to do it pro bono, the FMOs have the platform suppressed in our systems because we don't want to pay all the enrollment costs of having plans that don't pay commission. We don't just like to lose money.
Yeah.
So you cut off the enrollment mechanism. It's not there. And then the carrier cuts off their technology too, and you're resorting to paper apps. It's not even that the broker won't do it pro bono. It's that they don't even have the means to do it. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and when you're not being compensated for a couple of the carriers that you represent, nobody can go out and do any of the work, even social workers, you're basically an unpaid volunteer at that time. And that's not effective or efficient, especially to help, potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of beneficiaries that need help. And like we've talked about many times on the podcast over the past year, the unintended consequences of a lot of these decisions actually resulted in the exact behavior that CMS was initially trying to circumvent,
Right. Or solve, yeah. So I digressed a little bit. I got off topic a little bit because you were just talking about carriers having to kind of rebuild some relationships and, kind of build back those bridges and relationships. And like I said, I think that when we kind of start to get a picture about like call letter atmosphere, environment for 2026, where everything's headed, I think it's going to, I think we were kind of at a very peak moment in time of the industry of all-time challenges, difficulty as far as, technology, regulation, selling environment, complications, restrictions in funds. I mean, everything, the perfect storm all at once. I think it was peak difficulty this past year. And I think as we move into next year, it eases and gets a little bit better. And so I think those tensions are going to kind of drop a little bit.
Yeah, just, broadly, one more kind of future prediction, I think, is there's a lot of very pro, business-friendly minds in these cabinets and entrepreneurs and things like that. And I do think that there will be, just kind of like there's always talk of simplifying the tax code that's just escalated, year over year over year. I think there's going to be a simplification of some of these funding mechanisms from CMS to the carriers. It basically has materialized with all these, legislation pieces over the past 10, 15 years, that the funding and compensation metrics for these carriers has become a very complex algorithm of, continually moving data points that has made it extremely challenging for these carriers to run a business. And so
there's hundreds of inputs on stars and HEDIS, all these different categories.
Yeah. And so I think that, if I had to, again, look at my crystal ball, some of these people in CMS, in a new administration will kind of go, wow, this is, extremely overcomplicated. We've made this very difficult to just get funding, to these carriers for these different things. There's all of these ever-changing variables. And I would guess there's going to be some simplification over those formulas over the next couple of years.
Yep, I would agree. The other thing that I would, and what happens from this again is, we joke about it, and some of the more experienced people in the industry that I'm connected with on LinkedIn, we've talking about history repeating itself, and there's been mention of history repeating itself over and over and over again, where when the funding environment got better, you started to see more Medicare Advantage products in rural areas, in these underserved areas, XYZ, PPO, because a consumer wants PPO, but in the reality, it's really hard to do cost containment and profitability with that PPO, especially when you have these high risk, these rural areas, the FQHCs, it gets more challenging. And so those are a lot of the areas that are getting cut now. And so it's probably going to be this thing where we saw some restriction this year, like we talked about. Give it 2 to 3 years, and you're going to start to see, I think, more expansion starting to happen again, just as a result of, again, environment, what's the direction, what's the tone of, the new appointees, and what are they going to try to accomplish. So again, just more, I guess, to wrap up and finalize my kind of predictions there with, Dr. Oz.
Yeah.
So
Final thoughts for me on that. I do think there's going to be some more consolidations too, and some acquisitions and things that happen, in the provider space, in the carrier space as well. I think that, the funding environment, green lights will look good for some carriers, while others have gone through, kind of hard times and kind of tap out, and there'll be some consolidation opportunities there. And the marketplace will kind of shake out in a lot of those different areas as well. But
Agreed.
yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that, we could use some calmer storms, at least a little bit more simplification and clarity would do the industry very, very well.
Yep. And I would say I was wrong. I'm admitting here I was wrong. I thought we'd have our call letter by now, but I guess, we have enough lawsuits pending right now that they weren't going to drop a call letter. I was expecting one in November, haven't seen it. So totally thought we'd have one by now.
Well, Friday is tomorrow. I mean, we could get a surprise one, but, there's a lot of stuff going on, right now anyway. So who knows? There's still a lot of the, last year's call letter that's still so up in the air that maybe they just figured, there's already a lot of stuff to work out.
Yeah. The other thing, just as mentioning, you brought up the lawsuit that's happening too. There was the multitude of the star cut points and how it was done earlier this year. It was Scan and, several others that had a successful lawsuit against CMS. And the one that's happening right now, like we said, is, again, it's United, it's Humana, and Centene. And they're suing CMS. Basically, there was like one little metric in their quality with customer service and phone calls into customer service. I didn't read the specific details, but essentially it was like, they used really small data, like one phone call or only a handful of phone calls to make a determination about quality. And this like negatively impacted, I think it was Humana, by like the tune of like $73 million, one phone call. And so they pushed back on it, and CMS has already kind of said like, yeah, well, we've already changed or limited or factored that into the equation for 2025. But for 2024, too bad, so sad. And they're like, no. So I would just guess, based on track record and what the results been and everything else, that either gets settled or that they win those lawsuits. And especially because of, I'm not an attorney, but looking at them already changing those metrics for the coming year is kind of an admission of, sets a precedence almost, or an admission that it was wrong. So I would imagine, my guess is that that's going to be successful, those 3 lawsuits against CMS right now.
Yeah, definitely. There's been a lot of stuff still pending there. I'm interested to see what happens with some sort of finality with the integrity and AmeriLife lawsuit against CMS for the compensation thing. I wonder if that'll, work towards some sort of final resolution before the end of the year.
Yeah. And what's weird is, like, you hear, again, I'm having to figure out how to talk in code about this too, because there were all these different lawsuits against Big Bad Orange Man, and then, Elon too, and these lawsuits. And essentially now all these lawsuits are just being thrown out and just being dropped. And so I almost just wonder, to your point, what's going to happen now that there's a more clear path heading into 2025? Do a lot of these things just go nowhere and die? So
yeah, well, I think, once there's some final clarity, because, with the current appointments, it's looking like there may be a fight on, the approval of some of the cabinet appointees and things like that. And so I think once there's probably going to be some finality there, we'll start seeing some of those things shake out, right? Where it's like, you don't want to waste time, effort, money, and resources in legal battles that are just going to be tossed aside by the incoming leadership, right? So that does nobody any good. It just delays things. But I think, by end of January of next year, we'll have a lot of clarity going in how we make decisions through the rest of the year.
Yep. So we talked about the lawsuit. We've talked about, the new appointee. What else we got to hash out?
I kind of wanted to talk about the ACA open enrollment, kind of some of the finger in the air whisperings of kind of, what's going on in the industry, what we're seeing personally and from our friends across the industry. But it definitely seems like carriers had large expectations and goals for enrollments. And my kind of read on it is goals were set based on last year, where there was an incredible amount of fuel and fraud, waste, and abuse going on, and a lot of money getting dumped into acquiring new lives and new heads.
Yep.
And
I would add, I want to jump into that too. Like I would love to hear, I'm putting this out as like a bolo. Hey, carriers, please let me know. And some of you, we talk regularly. I think that the fraud was even way worse than you really understood or acknowledged, because again, going back to the numbers that were set for like your goals and what's actually being written instead of what your goal number was, does that provide you with any like more self-reflection onto the policies and the business practices and everything else that you had there? Because I think in my mind, it was far worse than you even realized for many carriers.
Yeah, I think that, they're looking at like submission numbers and things like that and where they ended last year. And there's so much less activity, it feels like, this year with the ACA space. And there's we know for a fact that a lot of massive entities, and call them large ACA call centers, have essentially been neutralized or shut down, that were accounting or attributing for a lot of the chaos last year. So there's that. I think a lot of agents this year tapped out on the ACA too.
True.
And a lot of agencies, it seems like it was a fever pitch around this time last year, where everybody was jumping over themselves to get into the industry and throw dollars, to build these books of business in the ACA space. And that house of cards collapsed in Q1 of this year. So I think there's a lot of, from the local, call it the mom and pop agent, to big entities that kind of tapped out or got their butts handed to them financially this year. And they were not geared up to take advantage of the continual ACA growth, or, they've kind of matriculated back into the Medicare sales and kind of said, hey, there's more stability, more profitability, more revenue long-term in that. And I think there's overall less sales activity being allocated towards the ACA. I think there's also a little bit of uneasiness of what's going to happen to the ACA next year, whether that be, justified or not. I think people think, oh, well, could a whole thing be going away, which we, of course, don't think that's going to happen at all, or what's going to happen with subsidies next year, things like that. So I think there's a little bit of trepidation there from a lot of entities and agents about how much emphasis do I still put in this. And then I think that, the changes that came from all of this chaos this last year have slowed down the entire engine very substantially. I mean,
well, let me jump in on one thing. So what Mike was referring to there is we have seen it. We've seen a lot of these legacy Medicare shops and agencies and FMOs who are really big in the Medicare space, who suddenly, as a result of all of like the really aggressive regulation and the call letter and everything, freaked out, uncertainty in the industry, and they're hurried and like, hey, how do we how do we stay afloat? Let's go over here into the ACA space. So we saw
It was like a gold rush. Yep.
We saw a flood of people trying to get over into the ACA. And so I think what they're talking to is you're seeing these sales organizations growing with all these additional NPNs and all these other agents and assumed bandwidth. And when you can say, hey, how many sales are we making as an organization right now based on these NPNs? Oh, well, we grew our number of NPNs by 30 or 40%. We're going to therefore take our same average app per head per agent and just times that across all this growth we've had. And that's going to be our new big sales number. And that is what I think has happened that's a little bit flawed in the goal setting, the expectations with some of the carriers. And again, a lot of those organizations are now going, okay, things kind of subsided. They weren't as bad as I thought. I'm back to my old ways of doing business and selling Medicare. And they're not really putting that emphasis and effort into the ACA. And so I think that we have seen that happening. And then the last part to clarify that you were talking about is from a process perspective. Mm-hmm. The process to enroll was so much easier and quicker last year, even when it was a legitimate enrollment, to where now, even let's just say that you're running a virtual business, a call center business, you're a legitimate person, or you're a field agent, and you're going to meet with somebody at the kitchen table. Before, you quickly did the enrollment in less than 5 minutes, and you were done and on your way. And now you're sitting on the phone calling into the marketplace to do your enrollment. You physically don't have as much time to do the amount of enrollments that you did last year. So that's what he's referring to in saying that the process to take the app is worse this year, and it doesn't permit or allow for as much production.
Yeah, there's been a massive choking out of productive and effective agents too, because, Health Sherpa came out with Resume Link that was meant to, make that easier. But I think that it's not through their fault, but most agents have pretty much abandoned that because the success rate of it was so low, 10% or less of being able to match that up. And so agents have just said, well, to hell with that. I guess I got to call CMS on all these. And then what we've seen anecdotally is we have a lot of agents that have massive books of business.
Right.
And the difference of like renewing an ACA book and doing all that service work is eating up so much more time this year to renew all those clients and keep what you have, that none of them have yet to be able to really start focusing on a lot of new growth yet, and yet here we are where
a couple weeks into OE.
Yeah. OE's, half over essentially for 1/1 effectives. And a lot of these agents are just starting to now get around to be able to have some bandwidth to start focusing on new sales,
When you've got 900 members or 1,500 and you're calling through to do those renewals and you're going, oh, you shouldn't be on this bronze 0. Let's move you to this silver. Oh, let's get on the call at the marketplace. And
yep.
It's you're renewing, you're maybe renewing 10 people a day or 20 people a day. You can't just bust them out like you used to last year.
Correct. Yeah. And if let's say you're a hybrid agent, which a lot of agents are, and you're doing Medicare and ACA, well, this year you had way more service work on the Medicare side of things with overlapping, enrollment periods too. So a lot of our, agents have been, just running around, chaotically busy for the past 6 weeks already. And there just hasn't really been enough time to, shift that whole focus there. So I do think that the ACA numbers will come, but I don't think that a lot of the carriers, at least from what we're seeing in conversations we're having behind closed doors, that the carriers looked back at it and said, hey, last year was anomalous. We're probably not going to see growth like that. Let's set some, tailored expectation goals. Corporations don't typically work like that, right? Like they don't go, we got this many thousands last year. Let's shoot for half that.
Shareholders don't like to hear that.
Yeah, they always want more. It's like more.
Right.
And so I think there's a little bit of a right sizing going on there, and I'm all for it with the the ACA space because I think it's evolving into a more healthy, sustainable ecosystem for sure. But there's definitely some inefficiencies and some challenges there, some overcorrections, again, made by policies and things like that have just made it, the solution has been worse than the initial problem.
The other thing I want to kind of bring out, if you're an agent out there thinking about doing marketplace or ACA sales, or you're actively in it, that's your game. Big announcement coming out of North Carolina this last week too. Shout out to the North Carolina DOI. Good job. I actually like this one. they basically said no more NPN override. It's a violation of our state statutes and rules and longstanding rules. And what it is we call it like agent swapping or desk swapping. So it's been something I have been very proactively talking to carriers about, saying, an advisory council, or if any regulators are listening, I'm all for it. I think it's absurd. I think it is crazy that you can get somebody with one NPN, like a principal, and then having multiple other people riding off of their NPN. And it's a practice that we don't do, like even with our virtual agents and call center. We've always individually appointed every one of our NPNs with the carriers, and we make sure that every one of those agents gets their license in all those applicable areas, because they're a fiduciary and they should be responsible of what they do with their license. And, we make sure that they do all their certifications for the private exchanges, and we do it on an individual basis. That's how it should have always been done. Mm-hmm. A lot of these big agencies, they didn't want to pay all the licensing fees of all the other agents,
or get people licensed at all.
And so what you find is, in extreme cases, we've even seen an agency where you have a warm body, a pulse, somebody with an NPN, and they even have offshore people not even in the U.S. We're talking, offshore contractors paying them pennies on the dollar of what they should be making, dialing and committing fraud or making sales under that person's NPN en masse, right? And so huge problem that I've been talking about for a long time. And then in other cases, you have agents where, maybe in middle of the road, they're licensed, they have an NPN, but only in their resident state. And then they go and, sell in 41 states off of their agencies or principal's NPN, because you don't want to buy 40 more licenses for each one of those callers. And so you're saving a lot of costs there. But again, you don't care about the quality because it's not your NPN on the line or your license, and it's hard to hold people responsible that way. So North Carolina, good job saying no more of that. Now the carriers, I've already had discussions with one or two of them who are like, yeah, boy, we have allowed that in those areas, but now we're not going to, we're looking at processes on how to fix that. And I hear there's a few other agents that are going to follow, or states that are going to follow suit, where they're also going to say no NPN override in our state or in this state. So if you're listening and you have been one of those people selling under somebody else's NPN, I think that was a bad practice all along. You should change your behaviors. You should start getting those other licenses. You should get your appointments with carriers, direct, not via a principal NPN. And if you don't do it proactively right now, you're going to be forced to do it, I'm sure, here in the near future. I would not be surprised that within 90 to 120 days that there's 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 states that don't allow principal NPN override selling. So just anyways.
Definitely going to happen.
That was big news coming out this last week. It's not a matter of if, it's a when, coming soon. So again.
ACA industry evolving right before our eyes, right? Like, paying a lot of good opportunity there. We have some really good carrier partners. Having said all of that, we're still very bullish and very, excited about the ACA opportunity. We think that it is healthier and more viable for long-term sustainability, and it's going to stay that way. And, if you're looking for a good home to do that, we think that we're a great agency for you hybrid agents that like to do, Medicare and ACA. Right. And it's a big initiative for us, going forward. So there's not a lot. The other kind of, nuance to that industry is there's not a lot of FMOs like us that are good at both, right? Somebody's
Correct.
usually muling those contracts through another FMO or another carrier partner or upline and things like that. And there's not a lot of entities that actually have direct contracts with both ACA and Medicare carriers, even though they're a big producer for those same companies.
Right. And those agents tend to have a hard time getting support because, they kind of point the finger at each other to support the agent,
Yeah, so. I think, I can't remember if I mentioned this on the last podcast, but I wanted to mention how amusing it is to me about how differently some of those carriers operate. There's certain carriers that are just big, dominant, don't have to, play the rules, or play the certain games with agents or do anything to ingratiate there. And then on the ACA side, they operate completely differently, So yep. Even though they're the same company, same entity, same dog, different leg, as our dad used to say, but they operate
silo. Completely different silo.
Different personalities, different connections, different different ways of doing business.
And here's what you learn in the business too. They don't care what you do in the other silo.
Correct.
You know, the Medicare side doesn't care what you write in ACA. The ACA or the marketplace, they don't care what you write in Medicare. It's like, what have you done for me lately, and what are you going to do for me tomorrow?
Yep.
So, anyways, we probably should, before we wrap, talk about two other things really quick. I want to talk a little bit. Can we talk about Medicarians? Is that like, okay? Yeah. So we should talk about Medicarians coming up. And then we should also kind of talk about just wrapping out and closing AEP and what that looks like. Medicarians, again, it was last week of March, first week of April, somewhere in there.
Yep.
It's going to be at Caesars this year. We've talked about it before. We're a little hesitant or reluctant to kind of get in last year with Medicarians, but certainly it's become really a big critical component to the industry and just being like a venue for all people in the industry to be at. And so, we really recognize that and the value of it. And so I think that this next year we're going to have a much bigger presence at Medicarians.
Yep.
I think you're already announced as a speaker.
Yep.
I'm a speaker, but they're waiting on
top 50. I don't know if I'm going to be speaking just outside the men's room or a keynote. I have no idea.
Yeah, I'll be speaking too, but they're waiting on me. I didn't give them my profile picture yet. So you can just, Mosiah, maybe you can just take a picture of me on the podcast and send it to him. I don't know, but I don't like my LinkedIn picture. So
yeah, so we'll definitely have an increased presence there. We have a great relationship with the team at Medicarians. They're doing some amazing things. It's looking like we're trying to coordinate with Jay, one of the founders. I think he's a CEO, to come out and actually do a podcast with us live.
Yep.
Talking about how they got started in Medicarians, and because their group owns a handful of other niche shows in the marketplace too.
Yes.
And so they've kind of done a really good job with their advisory board, and we have other industry friends that have, kind of helped them on the board and help that show get going. So
yeah, so I think he's planning to come out to be on an episode and also, maybe set the table or expectations for what's changing or what kind of expect this next year at Medicarians. But I do know that we'll be there. I think we'll be shooting podcasts live from Medicarians, and I think did we land on a sponsorship package yet, or what?
Yeah, so this is subject to change. So maybe, but this will be a good representation of us. But we're sponsoring the welcome party. Unless something falls apart last minute. Sorry, Medicarians, but it looks like we're going to be sponsoring the welcome party when everybody's there. Out the initial social that we had a good time at last year, welcoming all the friends in the industry. So we'll be the sponsor of that. And then, like Dan said, we're going to have this podcast studio. We're going to transport it down. We're going to bring our guy Mosiah down there, our content creator, and we're going to shoot podcasts there in booth. So any of you guys, across the country, if you want to have some good ideas for podcast content, or you want to, be on the show, let us know. We're looking to do 3 or 4 episodes a day.
I know. I just got to prep for it. More energy drinks, more caffeine, more gasoline. But we're going to do a couple a day. And if you do listen too, and you just want to stop by and say hey and meet us too, like, it'd be great. We'd love to meet you in person.
Yep.
So we're excited about Medicarians. We'll talk more about other events next year, but that should be a good one. That's Q1 early on. And then I would just say we probably should wrap with talking about a typical agent or agency out there and what they really should be doing right now to wrap up and finish AEP really strong. Two thoughts that I have just for everybody. Remember, we've been calling this Super AEP from like October 1st through March 31st. I think that, like we've been talking about, there's been so much disruption this particular year. 7 times more people got SARS letters than they did last year. There's still a lot of people who are just waiting. It was also that E word every 4 years that happened. There was a lot of components to this year's Medicare open enrollment season, or AEP. And so there's still a lot of people who need help. Finish strong throughout AEP. I also think that even December 8th through the 31st, it's a great opportunity to continue working when everybody else goes and hangs it up. Be one of those people that's still working, because there is still plenty of opportunity during that time period with a lot of election codes out there. Mm-hmm. And then I think there's going to be, again, a chunk of people that really didn't make decisions during AEP that are going to drag over into OEP and make it the strongest OEP that we've seen in over 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
So
It's been interesting to how the industry's evolved. It still wouldn't surprise me if we see some sort of official extension from CMS of AEP. I still don't think that's out of the question. However, I think that this open enrollment is going to be the biggest yet that we've seen. And Dan and I were talking about it earlier. For us, we kind of divide the year into thirds now. It's like a third of the business is done during AEP.
Yep.
A third during OEP, and a third during lock-in, just because there's so many different SEPs and extenuating circumstances, and frankly, people that need help. And the amount of people that need help this year is going to be greater than it's ever been. And you just know for a fact that there's going to be a lot of people that show up in January. They didn't pay attention. They stuck their head in the sand. They ignored all the ads. They threw all their mail away.
Yep.
And they go show up and are surprised to learn that their plan's been eliminated, their plan was SAR'd, their medications have changed.
Or they didn't read their ANOC.
Yep.
And which who does? Who reads that stupid ANOC? The format is just god-awful. I'm sorry, carriers. It's stupid. It's a CMS thing, but it's a book this thick of crap, and it's like, guess what?
Legalese, yeah.
Nobody reads through that, and we look, let's be honest, we had a pullback in a lot of benefits, and that favorite little benefit that people use, whether it be a grocery card, whether it be dental, whether it be transportation, that favorite little benefit that they use, they won't realize that it's gone until they try to use it in first quarter. So I think that that's going to trigger a lot of people to actually care about and to go shop.
I still think too that, and we get a lot of context on this from that large Facebook group that we run with seniors, but there's a lot of confusion still too on when actual enrollment periods are now, because you still have AEP annual enrollment, and then you have OE open enrollment on the ACA side, then you have open enrollment again on the Medicare side. And I think there's just a lot of seniors that just don't really know if and when is their actual time to change plans, and they just know that it's either sometime between the end of the year or the beginning of the year, and they can pretty much do it.
Well, and I think that the government so CMS used to advertise and spend more dollars doing that back many years ago, and now they've spent more dollars advertising like the marketplace, and they haven't been spending as many dollars advertising, with Medicare beneficiaries about AEP. So I think that that's part of it too. And then it was kind of confusing, when OEP went away, during Obama years, I gotta be careful what I say. During different years.
Yeah, dang it.
I said keywords, Anyways, so with election periods kind of being there and not being there and changing a little bit. But anyways, I think that honestly the opportunity is phenomenal for you all out there working. We've seen it with numbers, with report numbers and average sales per agent across all of our distribution being significantly increased this year. The other thing I can tell you is I know that the average agent or agency is not very organized, meaning, and I'm not being critical, because it's a challenging industry when you're given limited information with each carrier, and the data that you get from each carrier it's not equal, right? Mm-hmm. Some carriers do a great job in providing you a lot of information and insight on your book of business, others not so much. So for you as an independent agent out there or agency looking across your overall asset, which is like your book of business and your renewals, it's very difficult to manage that. And I actually think that there's agents who don't really have a good handle on what components or piece of their book of business that they're losing or not going to renew or is SAR'd and they're not going to get paid on next year. And so if you're in that situation, I would encourage you to try to spend some time during this last little part of AEP trying to really pull together your data, see which of your members and book of business is going to be impacted by some of this, do the best that you can. And if you're not certain, double down and sell a whole heck of a lot more than you were going to kind of offset any of that book of business that you're going to lose.
Yep. Yeah, and final reminder, guys, this industry is a year-round industry now. You can be very productive every month of the year. You can make a lot of money, and there's a lot of beneficiaries out there that really need your help. So now more so than ever, and I think we're trending for a really strong finish to this AEP and a massive OEP as well.
Absolutely. With that, I guess for today anyway, we're going to wrap. We got to go. We got a call. Got to be on.
Dan and I actually have a live appointment with our parents. Help with their benefits as best we can. But catch y'all later.
See if I can log in my Sunfire.
Yeah, right. See you.
Agent